Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is Educational Podcasting Today, the podcast that helps teachers learn how to make podcasts, both in their home studios and in their classroom. And we are so happy and thankful for you to join us today. We've got some great things going on. A great guest today that's going to talk about his journey through podcasting and how you can take the journey today. And of course, if you guys are out there listening to this because you want to bring podcasting into your classroom, I have a great website that I want you guys to go and visit today. Podcastingwithstudents.com. That's podcastingwithstudents.com. Check out our brand new landing page. We're here to teach you guys how to bring podcasts into your classroom, help you making the right decisions for apps, for applications, for curriculum, all that great stuff. If you're looking to bring podcasts into your classroom today, check out podcastingwithstudents.com. My guest today is the host of the Teacher's Journey podcast. He's been a good friend of mine for, 7 or 8 years now. A fantastic teacher down in South Jersey. I want to bring on a good friend, Mr. Brian Costello. Brian, how are you today? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me join you.
Thank you so much for being here today. How are things down in South Jersey? How you doing, my friend?
They're windy and a little cold, but it's not snowing or Minnesota or wherever people are at where the entire state's closed. So I'm doing good. I got the kids to sleep and we're getting a chance to talk. We haven't talked too much in a while, so it's good to see you.
We haven't caught up. It's been a couple ed camps since we've seen each other, and you're doing some pretty cool things. Not only are you doing some good stuff in the classroom, but you are now the host of a fantastic podcast called The Teacher's Journey. Tell us a little bit about your show.
Yeah. So The Teacher's Journey is inspired for me. So it's basically my opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with teachers about who they are and where they got where they are. So how they got to where they are and how that helps them or helps them become or allowed them to become the teacher they are now.
And how long have you been doing it?
I started a little over a year ago. So last January is my first podcast.
And where can we find you? What's your website?
My website is costellocorner.com. That's got all the good stuff there. So that's got books, that's got the podcast. If you go to theteachersjourney.net, you'll find the book and the podcast stuff there as well. But costellocorner.com, that's the website for all things that I do pretty much.
Now, many people out there who are listening ask the question, how do you start a show? How does this whole thing go from concept in your mind? Okay.
You start poorly and you get better,
I'll let you finish that conversation. Go ahead. How did you start and how poorly was it?
Oh, wow. Okay. So basically I was talking with Dr. Sarah Thomas, who is the publisher for my book. And she basically said, what do you want to do with this? What would you see yourself doing with this? And I said, I look at this like, and it's actually the logo actually kind of fits this, is when I was in high school, I remember like one of the most meaningful classes I had. I remember watching these series of conversations between Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers, and they just sat down on armchairs in these big library, like super classic educational style, and had these amazing conversations about life and mythology and everything in the world. And I thought, man, I would love to just sit down with teachers all over the place and talk to them about their journey and their life and how they got to be where they are. And she looked me right in the face and she said, well, why aren't you doing that? I was like, well, what do you mean? She goes, you could do a broadcast, you could do a podcast, you could do anything. So what would you do? I said, well, a podcast probably would work. We could do that. So I spent probably about 2 or 3 weeks looking at things to figure out how to, what I wanted to use. I asked around for people who had, starter shows, people who just recently started shows in the past 6 months or so, or a year. And so what do you use? What do you use to edit? What did you use to put everything together? I just got some, got some advice, and I'm sure we'll get into all that in a minute. But, and I said, all right, now I just need to get people to talk to me. And I had a guest lined up, and I was ready to do this podcast, and I was going to record at like 10:30 at night because my kids were asleep, and this person was on the West Coast, and they had a family emergency and couldn't do it. And I just like reached out to a handful of people I knew. I was like, "Hey, does anybody want to come on and do this?" And Jennifer Costello was like, "Yes, I will do this. I'm awake and I'm here. As long as you don't need my visual, like my face, we can just do audio only." And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." And it was so much fun. It was bad, but it was fun. And just bad in terms of I didn't know what I was doing with the recording of it. I didn't know how like the whole workflow process took forever. I didn't have an introduction or an ending at all. I had the content, and I had to go back and figure out all the rest afterwards. But yeah, it just started. Like I just said, all right, let's do it. And after a couple weeks, I had guests, and I lined up more and more, and I tried to commit to a certain timeline and everything like that. So
And you know that it's a good story, and I'm glad that you're telling this, because many people start their show and they say, I don't know how to start. I don't know what to do first. And the answer is always just start. All right, hit the record button, do it. And I always preach about the rule of 50. Your first 50 episodes are not ever going to be as good as your next 50 episodes, right? Every episode's going to get better. Eventually you're going to hit the first step and you're going to go, all right, I kind of know what I'm doing. And 50 episodes, if you think about it, that's a year, or that's a half a year, depending on how often you do the recordings and stuff. But let's kind of go back to this. So you did your first episode. It took you 2 swings to get a guest. What have you learned since then?
a lot. A lot about just the workflow of it. A lot about how I want to how I wanted to approach what I was doing. So when I first started recording, I didn't necessarily know how I wanted the whole thing to work out. I didn't know if I was going to be cutting it down, if I was going to be like, I was thinking to myself, this is going to be 30 minutes, end of story, no more than that, maybe 20. And now I have some conversations that just go on, like they're 50 minutes. And I realize that that's a longer time for a podcast, and not everybody's listening to longer length podcasts, but the conversations we're having were so interesting and so meaningful that I didn't want to cut them off. And I had made a decision about the type of podcast I wanted to do, probably like after the first episode, where I said I knew I wanted to do conversation, but I was trying to be more structured at first, and I realized that wasn't going to fit the type of thing that I wanted to do. It's the type of show I wanted to do. So, but one of the things I think I've learned the most is just what works well for me workflow wise, like how I, schedule my episodes, how I get my guests in place, what I record with, what I, how I go through what I use and go through for the editing process, and how I just get everything. Like the workflow went from, days to hours to like less than an hour after recording. I have, unless there's a disaster on the recording and where I have to do a lot of editing, it's usually, it's about an hour.
Well, walk us through the process, because a lot of people, when they're first starting off, they're faced with so many options. And I see it on Facebook every day, right? Somebody comes on and says, what's the best app for this? And then they just get alligated with all of these different options.
All the apps.
and they're all the best app, right? Because everybody that's answering that at some point has taken the time to not like other apps. So I'm sure you've gone through your trial where you said what's out there, and you've gone, okay, I don't like this. I like this. This doesn't cost money. This doesn't cost money. This is good. This is bad. What are you currently using on your system to do, voice to voice or video to video recordings?
So the recording itself, I use Zoom, and I don't record enough or with enough people to have it cost anything.
Good.
So if you use, I think it's less than 4 guests. I could be wrong on that. So maybe, I don't know if you have more specific numbers, but I know that I don't normally have more than 1 guest on at a time.
Okay.
So if you're not having multiple guests, I record with Zoom. It gives me the video file, the audio file, and both individual audio files. So like each guest audio file all separated out. So if I needed to go through and edit the individual audio for one side or the other, it does break them down separately, which is really nice. And just that I don't need the video file from so if I'm not using video, which typically I'm not, I can just drop the audio file into the editing software and go from there. I do use Camtasia for my editing, just because I'm comfortable with it, and I have like a complimentary license. So it is a cost-based service. I think I would say that I would probably pay for it if I didn't get it for free, after having used it for a long enough time, just because of how much I enjoy the ease of it. But there are other programs that do very similar things, and some of which don't cost money.
So you're using Zoom to do recording, and that's a great tool. We use that here on TeacherCast from time to time, and I love that it gives you, like you said, not only does it give you the video, it gives you the audio, and it does that for free. I think it even gives you up to 40 minutes or 45. It times you out on the free plan, but you know, for a new podcaster getting into that, Zoom is a great option. And also we love Camtasia to do screencasts, to do editing, to do all those different things. What about the equipment here? Because of course that's always the first question that I get from teachers and new podcasters is, I want to do this. How much money am I spending? Right. So what are you in for right now? What do you recommend for new podcasters?
I'm still using the same microphone I bought a year ago, which I have found is pretty good. Is a Snowball. I got the one with the multi-directional sound, so it's the little bit more expensive one, but they go on sale all the time. So I think I paid less than $50 for it.
And that's a good quality
and it's
USB microphone. You can use it on an iPad, on a Chromebook, anything like that.
Yeah, and so I've used it with a couple different computers, as I was talking to you about beforehand. When I first started this, I was kind of between MacBooks, so because they're not cheap, and so I was using a low end Microsoft computer, just a basic one, that I could use that I could get the software on that I needed, and it was perfectly fine. One of the things I've added to that in the past like month or so is just a pop filter. And one of the reasons I did that is because I was doing some audio recording beyond my podcast, where it was just me, and I found that the sounds that I could hear in my voice when it was just me and I was just doing individual reading into the microphone were gross. Basically, wow, that's terrible. And that was like $10. I mean, it's basically just a thin piece of foam that you put in front of your microphone to make sure that it's working properly and you're not catching as much of that. And amazingly, it really did filter out a lot of that sound.
And we'll put some links as Brian's talking here. We're going to be adding all the links in our show notes. This is over on Educational Podcasting Today, episode number 42. We're going to have links to Camtasia and Zoom and Snowball, and I'll put in some pop filter mics. And I don't know if Brian, if you can give me the link to whatever you're using there, we can make sure that everyone's having this stuff, because these are important conversations, but really, when we're looking at this, it comes down to, okay, what are you going to do with your show? What kind of content are you doing? Now, you made an interesting decision here, one that I'm really interested in learning about. You created your podcast website using
Wix.
And I hear about Wix almost every time I turn on YouTube. I get some kind of a Wix commercial or something. Why create your podcast website on Wix?
Okay, so my podcast website, I had like 5 websites at one point. So I had a website for myself. I had a website for my global connection project that I've been doing. I had a website for my kids' books that I had written. So I had all these websites, and I thought I had a blog, and I had I was building this website for the book and podcast, and I thought to myself, no, I need to put all these in one place. I need to get this all in one like one little nice neat package so that when I need to do stuff to it, I don't, and I'm not trying to promote 5, 6 different places at once. I could just get
I
every place in one place.
I gotta ask you, how far down the rabbit hole did you go before you turned around?
In terms of how many different
I,
websites did I have?
I can't tell you how many times that was my story of I'm going to do this and this and this, and then you just stop and go, "What did I just do to myself?"
I always end up doing more things. Like I pick up new stuff. I decide to do new things. I try out new. I've got things on my plate that I haven't even gotten to yet. That I'm like, I really want to get to this. So, the thing is, for a while, I was just I when something new came along, I'd buy the domain name for $10, and then or $12, whatever it costs for 2 years when you buy it outright. Like
Hmm.
it was $20 for 2 years, whatever it is, to buy the domain name, so you don't have, Wix or Weebly or whatever your um, in your name. So I bought them outright, and I was buying them, and I had all these domain names, and I had all these websites. I'm thinking to myself, why do I have so many websites? Like I could do all this in one website with just a bunch of pages and subpages. And so what I ended up wanting to make sure was that I had a platform where I could import video, uh, and I could, um, if I wanted to, expand to set up, store sales, if I could do that, if I wanted to, if I wanted to house the audio playback from Spreaker, which is where my podcast is hosted. I could embed that right into the website, and I could do all that with Weebly, and I could do all that with um, basically anything. Maybe
Hmm.
not Google Sites, but everything else. Any one of the paid website options, I could do all that with. Uh, Wix had a good sale, so that was part of the deciding factor. But one of the things that they offered that I hadn't thought of until I'd started working on writing was a marketing feature. So like you have people sign up for your site, and they have access to specific materials, and then also you have the opportunity to they get emails from updates from you, which is not something I do often, but maybe 4 or 5 times a year I'll send an email out to people who are signed up for my website. Hey, I'm going to be speaking at this place, or hey, this is something new and exciting that's coming out, or hey, my kids' books are free on Smashwords for the next month, stuff like that. Um, just to send out those interesting updates. The other thing is I wanted to house all of my PD content in one place for people to access. And I had recently had a problem with someone using my presentation, like the name, the description, the everything,
Hmm.
at a conference where I was speaking. So I saw the description and the name and the name of the place, and I said, "Am I doing an extra session that I didn't know about?" And they were like, no. I'm like, this is the session I submitted. It's a session I've done 3 different places in this, like, and 2 of which were local. And just like, all right, so I need a place to put my content so that I'm not just giving people out the Google Slides to everything,
Right.
so that I know who's getting access to it. And everybody had it, and it was perfectly fine. But just after having that experience, I wanted to have a little more control over um, who's using the things that I'm sharing.
And all this stuff is important. Like when we talk about making websites, it's not about making the website, right? It's about using that online space and thinking about it as a digital hub. It's the
Yeah.
one place that you want people to go to find your book, to find your podcast, to read your blog, to subscribe to the newsletter, to learn what you're having for breakfast on Instagram, to follow you on Snapchat. All of those great things. That's why when we're looking at creating a podcast and we're talking about building a brand for yourself, that website is so important to get it done and to get it done right, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important. I mean, most of those website builders do a lot of the same things, and they're not hard to use. They're not hard to make the website look nice. You just spend a little bit of time on it. You can make it look the way you want it to. But the idea that you don't have to send people in a bunch of different directions.
No.
You can kind of have everybody that is going to, so that way you get the people who are going to learn about your PD see the stuff about your podcast. People who are going to learn about your podcast see the things about your PD or your blog or whatever else you want them to see. So it's all there. They say, oh, I never knew that so-and-so, had a book, or so-and-so had a podcast, or so-and-so. And then all of a sudden you get a lot more traffic at those things, because it's all, housed in one spot.
Friends, before we move on with our show, I wanted to let you guys know I have been in education now for almost 20 years, and I've seen the changes some students have come to face every single day, whether it's going through school hungry, not being able to see a doctor when they're sick, or not getting the proper rest at night. These challenges make it hard for kids to focus on their learning. I remember a story of a student who came to my office one day and she could barely stay awake due to all the circumstances happening around her at home that were beyond her control. I didn't know what I could do, and I wanted to be able to help her out in any way that I could. Thankfully, Concordia University in Portland is leading the way with their 3 to PhD program that helps to combat students' fears, freeing them to pursue their highest dreams. They're revolutionizing education by creating a holistic model that provides groceries, healthcare, and even clothing to students right here on campus, helping them thrive and helping our communities strengthen and grow. Concordia's College of Education offers online and on-campus programs where students have the opportunity to learn about a more compassionate approach to education and see how nurturing the whole student can lead to amazing things. To learn more about how you can help students conquer their monsters and achieve their highest dreams, visit cu-portland.edu/let's conquer. That's cu-portland.edu/let's conquer. And use the hashtag #NatureEducateGrow. Now, you might be listening to this show and saying, look, I am looking to write a book. I'm looking to be a speaker. I've got PD things that I'm going to be building. I don't have a good website. I'm looking for help maybe redesigning my website. And that's where I'm going to suggest to you guys to check out educationalwebdesign.com today. There's a lot of great things happening over at educationalwebdesign.com. But if you're looking to have your website looked at, redesigned, check out the guys over at educationalwebdesign.com. Fill out the Google form over there. They're going to do one-to-one consulting for you, help you guys build your educational brand. Visit educationalwebdesign.com today. Now, Brian, you said that you've been podcasting for a year. You said you learned a lot about podcasting. Where do you see yourself going in the next, let's say in the next 6 months or so as we head into the summertime? What do you hope to see your podcast do for yourself?
One of the things I think I love the most about the podcast is the diverse nature of the guests and the stories they have to tell. So my first year, most of my guests were teachers. I think I had one administrator and, a couple of media people, like media studies and school librarians, stuff like that. But most of them were teachers. I branched into some administrators. I'm toying with the idea of doing some things with, student teachers or like brand new teachers who are looking for jobs, things like that, to try and get those stories told as well. Really, one of the things that I want to do is tell as many stories as possible, because one of the most rewarding things about this podcast has been I've had people who've reached out to me privately and said, I hear your podcast in the morning on my way to work and it gets me through the day. To have someone go, yeah, seriously, it's like, I was like, wow, that's incredible. Because I really wasn't expecting that. I was just trying to, I'm just having some fun and talking to people that are interesting and hearing their stories. But those people's stories resonate with different people in different ways because of, what those people are also going through. And what I hope for over the next 6 months to a year is to get a few more different types of stories involved. So all these stories have been different, which is amazing. Some of which have taken a lot of surprise turns on me, which also interesting, and in a lot of good ways. But I want to try and branch outside of just, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but I want to branch out inside of past just doing doing podcasts with teachers.
Mhm.
So get some more administrators, get some people who are new to the field, get some people who are who work in like educational technology,
Well,
not specifically like in school classrooms, but people who work outside of educational technology, and how did they get to that place?
what makes a good podcast guest?
Um, that they're willing to share a little bit of themselves. I think that makes a really good guest, at least for me,
Mhm.
because I'm asking them to talk to me about where they get started in education, how they decided to become a teacher, and things that went wrong along the way, and how they ended up where they are. And usually that involves a lot of there's always plenty of great stories and positive things, and there's also usually some difficult things to talk about. And what I've found is that once you get talking to people, they start sharing. Uh, they start sharing a little more than they maybe expected, and usually not more than they want to, but more than they might have expected. And having that person share an honest story about their life, um, you know this as well, I'm sure, but when you look at, and this, I think this has to apply to people who are going to be looking at podcasting, and they say, "Oh, I can't do that because look at TeacherCast. I can't be a show like that. Like I'm not in that. I don't know how to do that." Um, every one of us has had moments of that, like that,
Mhm.
right? So like, and at some point, we all had those moments where I don't know how to do that. I can't be that person. Or we tried to do that and failed. And having good guests to me means having people who are willing to share a little bit of that with the listeners, so that those people who are struggling or who need the boost or who need to be affirmed in a way that uh, you know that we all need to be affirmed sometimes, hear that it's okay, that it's going to be all right, that these people who have been through some of them incredible things um, have managed to do well. And those are some of the people that you look at and you think to yourself, I can never be that. But here they are.
It,
And
it,
they've been things that you've been through.
well, and it's always important to we say networking is important, right? But it's not always just networking, meeting people to meet people. It's meeting people that have traveled where you've been. That way you can reach out when you need that help.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I mean,
And of
mentoring
all
and
different kinds of like mentoring is a great thing, and a great place to look for that is, Twitter, Facebook, social media, other podcasters that are doing this. Brian, who do you look up to in the educational or in the podcasting world? Like when you're sitting there going, I'm stuck, what do I do? Where do you turn?
um, so in terms of just educational, I have a handful of really good friends, people who I've known for a long time through a lot of them through social media. And if I don't know what to do, besides talking to my family, I try to talk to them and say, what's going on in this situation. I've had a few situations over the past few years, probably like past 5 years or so, where things just didn't go well, and I definitely needed those people. Uh, people like Corey Graham and Sarah Thomas, and um, you know, oh, there's a lot of them, but these people that have really been there for me from the get go for a long time. Um, and then when it comes to podcasting, it's been it's interesting, but I've had a lot of good advice, and I watched a lot of your shows, and I remember talking to you at the beginning, like when you first, and some just really random things that I thought and learned about, like you talked about one time, just saying, I never actually just stopped the whole thing. I just let it go, and when things go wrong, I just wave my hand, and then when I'm watching the video, I know that's where I need to make cuts,
Mm-hmm.
which was really helpful because just stopping the recording at any time is a pain. Um,
That that
and
that is a big lesson for new podcasters. One
yeah,
file, one podcast.
yeah, absolutely. It's much easier that way. And things like that, just, you know, yourself and a few other podcasters that I enjoy listening to, Dan Krennis. Um, and, I find that I listen to randomly, like I'll listen to someone will post something that they did, and I'll be like, I never heard of that one before. And there's always new educational podcasts coming out. And when I hear other people's podcasts, it kind of lets me think about what they're doing and how I could be doing it differently. and if there's anything that I could add to or change. And one of the reasons I've talked and thought more about broadening out where I am, like who I'm talking to, is from listening and talking to Dr. Will, because his podcast, he got me thinking about, yes, he said when I changed the direction of my podcast, he said it changed everything and it really made things interesting for me. So, I'm thinking to myself, how can I broaden the connections of my own podcast?
So what can we learn from Dr. Will? Which, by the way, we just had Dr. Will on the show, and I'll put the link over here. But if you ever watch the Dr. Will show, he is not afraid to pivot. Right? Like, if you're going in one direction and it doesn't work for you, make a left turn and move that needle a little bit. He's got some good stuff. I'm glad that you're a Dr. Will fan, because we certainly are here on TeacherCast.
Yeah. I actually did a great podcast with Dr. Will, and the funny thing is, I almost wish that I had recorded the conversation that took place after the podcast, because we just sat there and talked for about 3 hours. like it must have been midnight by the time I was done talking to him. And it was just such a good conversation even after we recorded. But one of the things that really, hit home for me was, he said, there's so much out there. There's so much that we can all learn from. He said, just because someone's not in education doesn't mean that their message, their thoughts, their ideas can't be impactful for you. And that broadening out those connections and starting to learn from people outside of the field and bring them into his podcast so other people could learn from people outside the field, made him feel like he said that reinvigorated him in terms of doing the podcast, in terms of continuing on with that. And really, I see that as an opportunity to, do something that's a little different than the masses, which is something I've already done. I feel like I'm already doing a bit of, is, there's usually only one set question for my podcast, which is, when did you realize you wanted to become an educator? Mm-hmm. And then we just go off of that story. And so I really like the idea of bringing some new things to the show and changing some, just changing the idea of who we can learn from, what kind of lessons are important. I don't know if I'll go quite as far off from education as Dr. Will has gone, because he's got a lot of different types of guests on in all different kinds of fields. I think my guest would probably still be relatively related to education, but I like the idea of broadening out and learning a little bit from people outside of the education field.
It is a good show that he puts together. Again, this is Educational Podcasting Today, episode number 42. We're going to have all the links in here to our Dan Kreina's show, who does the Leader of Learning podcast. We got our links to the show with Dr. Will here. Brian, if there's any advice that you could give a new podcaster, somebody out there who's listening to this show and saying, man, I know I can do this. All it takes is to get a Snowball microphone and some wicks. What advice do you have for those new podcasters out there?
Just hit record. Like you said at the beginning, do it. Just push the button. You know what? It's amazing how much, once I had the first episode recorded, I had to figure out how to do the rest of it. I had to work through the rest of it, even if it took a little bit more time. And then once you figure it out, like once you get it down, you can really cut through the parts that are scary for you. So once you've done it once or twice, like you said, 20, 30, 40, 50 times, it's going to be a lot better. But once you've done it once or twice, the fear of, I'm not really sure if I could do this, is gone. And you'll find that as soon as you notice that, even if it's 10 people have listened to your podcast, it's very affirming for the fact that you're putting something out there and people are listening to it. And you get the statistics that kind of give you how much time people were listening and things like that. And you realize people are listening to the whole show, which is amazing, especially because some of my shows run long. But people are listening. And then after enough time, you get messages from people saying, hey, I really love this. Or, hey, this is important to me. I hope you keep doing it. And that makes them, it's really worth it. So don't get hung up on it being good, because it's more important necessarily for the message to be out than it is, and the story you want to tell and the thing you want to share with the world is more important than the quality of the sound and the editing and everything else. You'll get that stuff down, but you're never going to get it down on day one. You got to practice it. You got to go through it.
That is amazing advice, and I can't do anything other than echo that. Your first episode's not nearly going to be as good as your 50th episode, and listen to other educational podcasters. Listen to other podcasters out there who are not in the educational field. What can we take away from their shows to bring into our own? Brian, I got to tell you, you got the book, you got the great looking website, you got a fantastic podcast. What is next here, my friend? What other mountains does Brian Costello have left to climb here?
Well, I'm not so secretly at this point, since I'm going to tell you right now. I'm working on putting the book on Audible.
Okay.
Which will be fun. I am also working on another book, though that's going a lot slower than the first one. So something kind of a little bit of a follow-up, but we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping that, the more I say it out loud, the faster it's going to get done. And last but not least, I'm in the multi-year process at my school of redesigning and re-engineering the computer lab that I've been given to work in. So I'm hoping over the next year or two to start building up the funding and the grants to turn my computer lab into a full-blown robotics and virtual reality lab.
Nice.
I teach robotics, and the AR VR is something I just really enjoy. So I want to bring it to my kids and give them the chance to experience that stuff firsthand, out front of the crowd. So yeah, those are the things I'll be working on.
That's awesome. The podcast is called The Teacher's Journey. The website is costellocorner.com. Brian, what's your Twitter? Where can we find you online?
At BTCostello05. That'll be my Twitter, and that's the best way to get anything I share online, with the exception of things that are going on in my robotics lab, which would be at FAMS Future, FAMSFUTURE. That's where I share all the cool stuff that's happening in my robotics lab. That's on Instagram. I have that on Twitter too, but that's really an Instagram page. My Twitter at BTCostello05 is where you'll find me doing for most of the if you need to reach out for me for anything.
And we will make sure that we have the links to everything over in our show notes. This is Educational Podcasting Today, episode number 42. And if you're a podcaster looking to share your passions on our show, we would love to have you guys as a guest. Reach out to us on Twitter at Podcasting Today. And of course, you can leave us a voice message with all of your podcasting questions at teachercast.net/voicemail. Brian, one more time, thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us. Congratulations on a successful book and a great podcast, and continue, keep up the great work there, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be a part of the show.
Absolutely. And we want to have you guys be a part of this show, and everybody else, please come on your show, or please take a moment and reach out to us. We would love to have you guys on here. And on behalf of everybody here in the TeacherCast Educational Network, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with your students.